G'day coppers, welcome back to the bush. Actually my backyard again today. Now in this video we'll be checking out propane versus butane and how you can effectively refill propane canisters at home. What's the best method? Now these are pretty universal as far as camping is concerned. You can use them in your space heater or even in your butane torch, and these things are great. You can use them for car repairs, you can use them for starting up your fire with a bit of damp wood. You can even use them to light up your candles on your birthday cake. But first off, let's have a look at the differences between propane and butane. Now there are some distinct differences between liquid butane and propane. For starters, liquid butane is slightly heavier than liquid propane. So a litre of liquid butane is 600 grams and a litre of liquid propane 500 grams. So when it comes to vapor pressure, there's some important differences between butane and propane. Now, I was up the Victorian high country, headed up Old Bluff track for those who know the area, up near the Pinnacles, right up in the car park, up near the fire lookout, went to cook myself some lunch. It was cold, there was a little bit of snow on the ground, we're up at an elevated altitude, and I didn't have enough vapor pressure from the butane to cook lunch. Now that wouldn't have been an issue with the propane, and let me explain to you why. So at 20 degrees, so what it is here today roughly, you get about 1 bar of vapor pressure coming out of butane, and that's fine for doing your general cooking, whereas propane is up around about 7 bar. But when the temperature drops, butane at 0 degrees pretty much doesn't generate any vapor pressure at all, and therefore you can't cook your snags. But propane, on the other hand, will generate 4 bar of pressure at 0 degrees Celsius, so you can still cook your snags for lunch. But that's not all of it. The boiling point of propane is actually minus 44 degrees Celsius, whereas butane is just minus 0.5 degrees Celsius. So there are some distinct differences. Now, if you're living in a temperate climate, somewhere around the equator, either one will do fine for you. If you're living up in the Victorian high country and you experience snow, sleet and cold conditions, propane is the answer for you. So now we're going to have a look at how we're going to fill it up in the most effective and the safest way. So we're going to compare 3 ways of filling up empty propane bottles. First one, we're going to do it just as the manufacturer expects, and that's to put them in the freezer and fill them up using the adapter. Second one, we'll be using Forceps. So there is an overpressure valve which you can activate with a set of Forceps, and we'll be giving that a go. Thirdly, however, is we'll just at room temperature, so around about 20 degrees at the moment, we'll just screw it on and we'll see how much we can refill it up. So let's weigh them up so we have a baseline. First up, let's weigh the factory filled canisters as a baseline. So number 1 is 830 grams, and number 2, 835 grams. And finally, number 3 comes in at 842 grams. So now we'll empty the canisters into a 9 kilogram bottle and we'll get a empty weight for them all. Now, to get the contents of our 1 pounder into the 9 kilogram bottle, we have to put in the adapter. And don't forget, this is anti-clockwise to go in, opposite of a normal thread, left-handed thread. You just cinch him up, not too tight. And we just screw it down. Now once we've got him all screwed in, this is just a right-hand thread on these Coleman bottles. Open up the valve, and the liquid propane will run from inside here into the bottle. And you probably hear that coming across. You might have to tip it because it's a liquid. So we need gravity as its co-pilot. Once the noise has stopped, and it seems to have stopped now, we'll turn the valve off. And there could be a little bit of gas that comes out of here. That's why we're wearing our gloves. Now that's done, one down, two more to go. So we've emptied all 3 gas canisters now to a stage where no more gas is coming out. So we'll weigh up all 3 gas canisters and check how much propane was actually in them. Now, number 1 started off at 830 grams and now it's down to 378 grams. And that gives us a difference of 452 grams. Now, 454 grams or thereabouts is a pound, so almost on the money there. Number 2 started off at 835, is now down to 373 grams. That gives me a difference of 462 grams. So Mr. Coleman's actually giving you a little bit more propane for your money there. And finally, number 3 started off at 842 grams, now down to 381 grams. That gives me a difference of 461 grams. So again, Mr. Colman doing you a favour, giving you a bit of extra gas. But what about volumetric capacity? How much volume do one of these canisters actually hold? Now, in industry, the standard practice or best practice is to fill your gas canisters to 80%. Now, what I've done with an old canister here is I've taken it apart, I've removed both valves, I've drilled this valve out, and I've weighed it empty. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill it up with water and check what the weight is full, completely full. Now, coincidentally, water weighs 1 gram per cubic centimetre or per milliliter. So I'll be able to tell exactly the capacity of one of these containers. I'll do that now. Go and fill it up with water. So a gas canister is now full of water. So I'll place it on the scale and we get a reading of 1582, so 1582 grams minus the weight of the canister itself, which is 417 grams, gives us a weight of the water of 1165 grams, so 1.16 litres roughly. And that, coincidentally, is also the capacity in cubic centimetres of the canister. So there, now we can work out exactly how much propane, percentage-wise, is in one of these canisters. We'll do that in a sec. So we'll take number 2 for example. Now that had 461 grams of propane. Now propane doesn't weigh nearly as much as water. In fact, it weighs half as much as water. That's liquid propane, of course, I'm talking about. So double that, and that's 922 cubic centimetres of capacity. Coincidentally, that's 79% fill volume. So it fills up almost 80% of the container, right on industry standard. Well done, Colman. Right, yeah. So it looks like the standard Colman fill is safe and to industry standards. So let's get on with the home fills and see how we do with those. Okay, now to fill it up, first up we grab our adapter. Now remember, this one's lefty tighty. Screw the adapter in all the way. And we'll give it just a little bit of a lefty tighty, Simon. There we go, tighten up. Now this canister's been in the deep freeze for a better part of an hour. It's a good idea to wear gloves when you're doing this sort of thing. And this one's a right-handed thread, so we just spin him on clockwise. When that's nice and tight, and of course this is upside down because all the fluid flows to the bottom. And you can hear the gas and the liquid working its way into the canister from the 9 kilogram bottle into the 1 pound canister. And we'll wait for the noise to stop, which basically tells us then that it's finished transferring. Okay, we're there, so we'll turn the valve off and pull the valve out. And there's going to be a little spurt of gas. Okay, on to the next one. Now number 2, we're going to use the forceps or the pointy nose pliers on this one. So we'll screw it on just like we did the other one. Now this hasn't been in the freezer at all. So just at room temperature. Nice and tight. And just like before, crack the valve. And we'll wait for the noise to stop. Now sometimes you can reach in there and manipulate the overflow valve, but unfortunately in this one I can't. So I'm just going to fill it up, wait for the noise to stop. Because I tell you, Qantas is busy today. Okay, so just close off the valve there. And then you're going to vent a bit of pressure from the top. So putting this to the top, vent a bit of pressure out. Of course, very careful there's no ignition sources around. And then repeat the process 2 or 3 times. We'll go for 3, I like 3. Crack the valve again, and again we can hear liquid propane being transferred from the bottle to the canister. And turn the bottle off again. Take the bottle out and bleed off the pressure. Okay, and back on. Same old, same old. Nice and tight. Turn him on again. Again, we can hear liquid propane moving from the 9 kilogram bottle to the canister. Another plane. Rightio, we'll turn him off. Again, bleed off the pressure. Now that's mildly concerning because we're actually getting liquid propane out of there now. So I'm assuming it's almost up to the top, or in fact is up to the top. So we'll measure that and we'll see exactly how much propane's in there. Moving on to number 3. So number 3 is just at room temperature. It's about 20 degrees at the moment. We'll screw him on. Turn the valve on. Wait for that noise to stop. And then we'll take him off. After that, we'll compare all 3. Okay, it doesn't sound to be working any further. Crack the valve off and remove the canister. Rightio, back to the scales and see what the results are. Okay, let's check the results. Now, number 1 is coming at 817 grams. So that tells me that there's 439 grams, or almost the same as a factory fill, in the canister. And that's a 75% fill as opposed to a factory 80% fill. Now with the forceps, I can feel this one's heavier. and we've got 976 grams here. Now that's over 603 grams of propane in there, and that is a 100% full. It's full up right into the neck here. That's not great. There is zero room for expansion. We'll get into that in a minute. Now finally, the last one. Now this is the one that was just screwed on and the gas was let flow in, and we come up with 674 grams, and that's 293 grams full. So it's roughly about 50%. So we didn't get nearly as much propane in without using the freezer. So what do we think in the end? Let's compare the three methods. Firstly, the freezer method. Now that got us to a 75% fill versus 80% for factory. So that leaves us with a 25% headspace up the top to allow for expansion. Now, as well as a fill port, this is an overpressure port. So if the pressure gets too much inside the cylinder, it's going to vent to the atmosphere, which isn't great if you're in a car. The Forceps method, we managed to get this up to 100%. It's full of liquid propane from the bottom right through to the very top. And I will be venting this right as soon as I press stop on the camera. That's not a safe fill. If you put this in the car on a warm day, it will vent flammable gas into your interior. Additionally, the issue is, of course, propane is heavier than air, so it will sit in your footwells waiting for your mate to jump in and light up a cigarette, or perhaps turn on the ignition and get a small electrical spark. Up she goes. This is just not a safe method, guys. I mean, even if you've got scales, even if you've done the maths, there's just so many things to go wrong. I certainly wouldn't recommend it, and I won't be doing it in the future. Finally, just screwing her on at room temperature. Now they got us to a 50% fill, so it's a safe fill. It's like a 2/3 full container, and you certainly use one of those. You won't get quite as much propane, so you might need 4 bottles as opposed to 3 bottles that you filled in the freezer. It's not that much of an inconvenience, and if you don't have access to a freezer, it's a perfectly viable method. You might need an extra canister, and it doesn't really take up all that much room. So what do we think in the end? Freezer if you got it, room temperature if you haven't, and finally, never again. Righto guys, if you like this video, give me an old thumbs up, and if you didn't, by all means, give it a thumbs down, twice. Thanks guys, we'll see you in the next one. Started off at 842 grams, we're down, started off again. Trains, planes and automobiles. I like the automobiles, I don't like the trains and planes. I like planes. I don't like trains.